why did they feel that the Qur'an was incoherent? So we've given the reason why they consider the Qur'an to be incoherent from the perspective of revelation, the way that the Qur'an was revealed. But another reason why they considered the Qur'an to be incoherent is because they didn't allow the Qur'an to be read on its own terms. So whenever we read a book, whenever we look into something, we tend to do it based on our own experiences and our own baggage. So there is this idea of a discussion in Western academia related to the difference between Aristotelian and Western logic against something which is Semitic rhetoric or Semitic logic. What are these two different terms? I'll explain them very, very quickly. So Aristotelian and Western logic is basically a logic that we are familiar with in the West. So for instance, if I give you an essay and you write an essay, you're going to follow a particular structure. So the first thing is that you're going to have an introduction, and at the end you're going to have a conclusion, and in the middle you're going to have, example, the problem or the argument, and then you're going to have a response or a solution to that problem or that argument. And that's basically the way that you write an essay. You have, example, books which are written in a particular structure that follows that kind of linear continuity. Now, as for the Semitic rhetoric, because Arabic falls into what is considered to be from the Semite languages, it has a different type of logic. And that is that the logic basically goes round in circles. And it's really interesting how the Semitic logic actually works. So for instance, you'll have, in the beginning of a chapter, you'll have something, and then you'll have something similar at the end of the chapter. And then you'll have so there is clearly a link between the beginning and the end, the introduction and the conclusion, there's a link. But then also you'll have different structures that we're going to go into that are examples of Semitic rhetoric that follow a particular pattern. But the point is that it's very different to the Western or Aristotelian way of the way an argument or a chapter or a book is structured. So one of the Western academics, a man by the name of Michel Kuipers, who's in fact a Christian, he wrote quite extensively on this. And he says in one of his books, he says, we can further note that the Qur'an has a way, which is often very obvious for those who know to look, of handling Semitic rhetoric. The sudden changes of subject, sometimes interrupted by central verses, and then continued, the frequent changes of a person traditionally known by the term iltifat, a leap from the divine we to the third person, for example, are all indicators of the text's division. They make the framework visible under the skin of the text. So here is Michel Kuipers, who is commenting on this idea of the fact that if we are going to read the Qur'an in terms from a linguistic structural perspective, then we have to look at it from the Semitic rhetoric perspective. This is the reason why you had commentators, one of the very famous ones, an individual by the name of Theodor Noldeke, who was from the 19th century. He wrote a very famous book called The History of the Qur'an in German, then it was translated into English and Arabic. And he wrote this in the 1860s. And he wrote that the Qur'an brusquely interrupts one subject to jump to another, which it will also abandon to return to the first subject. So this is an example of how people, Muslims and sometimes even non-Muslims, who may just do not understand or not allowing the Qur'an to be read on its own terms. This is again another reason why Kuipers, he comments on this point, and he says, despite appearances, we can say that the whole of the verses from verse 1 to 11 of Surah Ma'idah, the 5th chapter of the Qur'an, is solidly constructed in a coherent manner, on condition that we make the effort to understand this coherence in terms of Semitic rhetoric, not according to modern Western criteria, which comes from Greek rhetoric. So we have to give the Qur'an, we have to give it its time and its space in order to express itself. We're going to go into some detail maybe in the second session, as to why the Qur'an has this particular structure. What are the benefits? What are the fawaid of having a structure like this?